Gigi Etienne is a technology and accessibility strategist. Her mission is to make the digital world more accessible to people with disabilities. She strongly believes technology has an enormous potential to empower people with disabilities as long as it is done right. She has experience in building and running accessibility programs at tech companies and as an accessibility engineer and tester. She is currently pursuing a master's in technology management at Columbia University. An enthusiastic public speaker, lucky us, Gigi is dedicated to spreading the word about the importance of accessibility. In her talk, Gigi will discuss building AI technology that is accessible to people with disabilities. How do we do that? What are the key things to take into consideration when building accessible technology? This talk will give you the answer to these questions and empower you to build technology that is accessible to everyone. The title of her talk is, Let's Not Trade Accessibility for Innovation. Please join me in welcoming Gigi.
Thank you, Sam, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. AI is changing the way that we live our lives. It's changing how we get jobs, how efficient we are at work or at school. It's even changing what music we listen to and what movies we watch. AI is also changing the lives of people with disabilities. I'll give you two examples. Lucy is a blind person, and she uses the Be My AI app to know things like, what is the expiration date of my milk bottle in the fridge? Or, do I have any eggshells in the eggs that I'm cooking? On the other hand, Franco is seeing the negative impacts of AI innovation. His family just bought a brand new TV with an AI voice recognition remote control. But despite trying to control the TV with his voice several times, he always got the same error message: I do not understand you. Franco lives with Down syndrome and has a speech impediment. He does not speak like the rest of his family, and the TV could not understand him. As we enter the next technology revolution and build technologies with AI, we have to make sure that we are not excluding people with disabilities, that we are not excluding people like Franco. We built the web in the 1990s, and today, in 2024, 16% of the world's population has a disability, and yet 96% of websites are not accessible to people with disabilities. Let's not make the same mistake that we did with the web. Let's not trade accessibility for innovation again. So how do we do this? How do we build accessible AI? What does accessibility even mean in the context of AI? Well, let's imagine you've been tasked with building an AI product at your company. I'll give you 4 key things that you need to take into consideration as you're working on your AI product. 1, you need to train your data model with diverse data. 2, you need to work with people with disabilities in the planning, building, and testing phases of your AI product development cycle. 3, you need to be aware of regulation, or even better, contribute to it. And 4, you need to continue to build accessible interfaces such as apps and websites. So let's talk about the first point, data. Diverse data. Data is the foundation of AI, and AI data is everything. So if you use a data set that contains data that is biased and not accessible to train your AI model will be biased and not accessible. So when collecting the data that you're going to use to train your AI model, it's very important that you make sure that the data is accessible. But what is accessible data? Well, it's both data about people with disabilities and also data that is accessible. What's data about people with disabilities? Let's look at Franco's example again. Why did it happen? Why did the TV not understand him? It happened because the developers of Franco's TV did not train the AI model with data of voices with people with Down syndrome, right? So we have to gather data and build databases about how people with disabilities interact with the world and with technology. And people like you guys who are building AI products have to make sure that we're using those diverse databases to train the models. And Franco is not alone. There are 250 million people in the world who have non-standard speech. So we have to make sure that we're collecting that data. What is now an example of data that is accessible? AI coding assistance. Developers can now use AI to get code suggestions or even sometimes to write code for them. But AI coding assistants are only ever going to write accessible code if they are trained on accessible code. And given that 96% of websites are not accessible for people with disabilities, imagine the possibility of using AI correctly to fix that problem, or even better, to only write accessible code from now on. So now you may be wondering, where do I find these accessible databases? Well, there are a few people developing them. The University of Illinois, backed by Google, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, and Apple, are developing a large database of non-standard speech inputs with people with Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, Parkinson's disease, and other non-standard speech patterns. There are other databases, such as the Orbit database, that contains photographs of people who are photographs of things taken by people who are blind or low vision, or the Access Map that contains accessible entrances for people with reduced mobility. Now, let's talk about the golden rule of accessibility. Always include people with disabilities. You have to work with people with disabilities in the planning, building, and testing phases of your AI product development. If the developers of Franco's TV had done that, they would not have made that mistake in the first place. So how do you do that? Well, two. One, hire people with disabilities into your team. Hire people who are blind, who are deaf, who have cognitive disabilities, people who have a different lived experience, and I guarantee you, your product will be a better one. And two, test with people with disabilities. Test all the way from planning to deployment, and with a diverse group of people with different disabilities. And hey, don't forget to pay your testers for their time. Next, regulation. There is very little regulation around AI right now. In fact, 2 weeks ago, the world's first piece of regulation in the world was passed by the European Parliament, the AI Act. It does mention, luckily, that AI systems should not discriminate against people with disabilities. I do expect more of these regulations to come around in the world pretty soon as well, so stay tuned for that. There are other accessibility-specific regulations, such as the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 in the US, that your product will have to be compliant with as well, so be aware of that as well. But what's very exciting is that as you're working on your AI product, you'll be in a privileged position to understand the potential harms and weaknesses of your product, those that have to be regulated. So you can contribute to regulation and help build regulations to make the world of AI a better and safer place for people with disabilities. Lastly, we have to continue to build accessible interfaces such as apps and websites. Apps and websites, traditional apps and websites, are the way through which the end user is going to interact with your AI technology. So if you build a speech technology with AI, but the app is not accessible, a person with a disability is not going to be able to use your app at all, or your product at all. So this is the last piece of the puzzle, but it's a very important one, and one that has to be compliant with the regulations that we just talked about as well. So as we navigate through the next technology, the next technology innovation with AI, let's look back at the previous one, the invention of the web in the 1990s. The internet has made it possible for people with disabilities to do a lot of things. A person with reduced mobility now doesn't have to go to the bank in person, and they can access their banking services online. Or a person who is blind can now have access to millions of newspapers and books online that they can read. But despite all these opportunities, we failed at making the web an equitable place that everybody can access. We prioritized innovation over inclusion. Let's not make that same mistake again. Let's make sure that AI is designed and built for everybody. I am hopeful. I am hopeful because I am seeing the big tech companies doing this right from the beginning. They are training their AI models on diverse data and making sure that they're not discriminating against people with disabilities. But the work continues with you. Next time that you're working on an AI product or building an AI model, ask yourself these questions. Does our data contain data about people with disabilities? Is our data accessible? Are we working alongside people with disabilities? Are we testing with people with disabilities? Can everybody access our product? This is how innovation should be done. Because progress is not progress unless it's for everyone. Thank you.